The morning sun had no business being so cheerful. That was what Ethan Blackwell thought as he lay in the center of his California king bed, a bed so vast, so obscenely expensive, that it had once been featured in an architectural digest as a masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship. He stared at the ceiling of his Malibu estate, watching the light crawl across the hand-painted plaster like something alive, like something that had somewhere to be. He envied it. He couldn't feel his legs this morning. Yesterday it had been his hands. The day before, a blinding white pain had erupted behind his eyes and left him screaming into his pillow at 2 a.m. with no one, not a single soul, to hear it. Ethan Blackwell was 33 years old. He was worth $14 billion. He owned companies on 4 continents, had shaken hands with presidents, had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times before he was 30. He had a smile that photographers chased, and a jawline that artists had once literally asked to sculpt. He had everything the world had told him would make a man complete. And he was dying. Slowly, quietly, in the most expensive house in Malibu, surrounded by the finest things money could purchase, and he was dying in a way that no doctor on earth seemed to understand. It had started 2 years ago. A numbness in his fingertips after a long board meeting. He dismissed it as stress. Then came the fatigue, not the tired after a long day fatigue, but the kind that pressed you into the mattress like a physical weight, the kind that made breathing feel like labor. Then the pain. Sharp, migrating, mysterious. It moved through his body like a ghost, untethered from any logic, responding to no treatment. He had seen 31 specialists, neurologists at Johns Hopkins, a rheumatologist in Vienna, who was considered the best in the world, a team of researchers at the Mayo Clinic who had spent 6 weeks running tests that cost more than most people's houses. They had poked and scanned and biopsied and hypothesized. They had gathered in conference rooms and spoken in grave, careful tones. And every single one of them had, in their own eloquent, clinical way, told him the same thing. We don't know. The condition didn't have a name. It wasn't in any textbook. The nerve signals were misfiring in patterns that defied categorization. His immune system was doing something strange, something inconsistent, something that looked different every time they measured it. The leading theory, if you could call it that, was a rare, autoimmune-adjacent disorder that had no precedent in medical literature. They were documenting him, writing papers, treating him like a fascinating puzzle. Ethan had stopped reading the papers. He had, in the quiet darkness of the past several months, begun to accept something he had never accepted in his entire relentlessly successful life. He had begun to accept that he might not win this one. He didn't tell anyone. That was the Blackwell way. His father had built an empire without ever showing weakness. His mother had raised him with a handshake instead of a hug, and the quiet message that feelings were inefficiencies. He had 47 employees in this house alone, assistants, chefs, security personnel, a personal physician on staff. He spoke to all of them in clipped, efficient sentences. He had, at great cost to himself, learned to perform normalcy even when the pain was so bad he had to grip the edge of a desk just to remain standing. He was very, very good at pretending. The pretending was exhausting in ways the illness wasn't. It was on a Tuesday in October, gray and slightly cold by Malibu standards, that his head of household staff told him a position had opened. One of the cleaning staff had left, abruptly, for personal reasons, and a replacement had already been vetted and was ready to start immediately. Ethan had barely looked up from the financial report he was pretending to read.
"Fine," he said.
He didn't ask for her name. He didn't think about her at all. He had other things to not think about. Her name was Maria Santos. She arrived the next morning at 7:45, 15 minutes early, with a tote bag over one shoulder and a small, wide-eyed girl balanced on her hip, her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, because the daycare had called that morning with a last-minute closure notice and Maria had used every favor. She had to get this job and she absolutely, under any circumstances, could not afford to lose it on her first day. She stood in the service entrance of the Blackwell estate with her heart hammering and her daughter's small fingers twisted into the collar of her shirt, and she made a decision that would change everything. She walked in anyway. The head of household, a precise woman named Carol, met her with an expression that suggested this was not ideal. Maria had already prepared her speech, apologetic, practical, promising it would never happen again. She said it quickly, quietly, in the way of a woman who had learned to make herself small in large spaces. Carol looked at Lily, who looked back at Carol with enormous dark eyes and the solemn, unblinking gravity of a small child encountering a stranger. "She won't make noise," Maria said. "She never does." This was, it turned out, entirely true. Lily Santos was the quietest 3-year-old anyone in that house had ever encountered. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She moved through rooms like she was trying not to disturb the air. She carried a small backpack with 2 picture books, a set of fat crayons, and a worn stuffed rabbit named Bun who had lost one eye somewhere around Lily's 2nd birthday and had been loved even harder since. Maria worked with Lily perched in a quiet corner of whatever room she was cleaning, coloring carefully inside lines, occasionally narrating her drawings to Bun in a whisper so soft it barely qualified as sound. The house had 42 rooms. Ethan Blackwell was in the study on the 3rd floor when Maria Santos first knocked on the open door to let him know she needed to clean. He didn't look up. He gestured with one hand, "Come in, do whatever. I'm not here in any way that matters," and she moved through the room quickly, efficiently, leaving things cleaner and quieter than she'd found them. She was almost done when she noticed it.
The desk.
The meticulously expensive desk. And on it, between a crystal paperweight and a stack of financial documents, a small framed photograph that was so out of place in this room of cold perfection that it stopped her completely. It was a photo of a boy, maybe 10 years old, laughing so hard his whole body was blurred with motion. He was on a beach. Someone had been swinging him, catching the moment just before he flew. His face was unguarded in a way that had nothing to do with the composed, controlled man sitting 6 feet away from her. Maria looked at the photo. Then she looked at the man. Then she looked away before he could catch her looking, and she finished her work, and she left. She didn't say anything. She didn't know yet that she didn't need to. Her daughter would. The 2nd week was when Ethan Blackwell started noticing her. Not Maria. Not at first. It was the child. He had forgotten entirely that the new staff member had brought a daughter with her that first day. Carol had mentioned it, had offered to make it a one-time exception given the circumstances, and Ethan had waved a hand and forgotten about it completely. But the daycare, it turned out, was closed for renovations for a month. And Carol, who was a more perceptive woman than she appeared, had watched the way Maria worked and made a quiet decision not to make it an issue. So Lily Santos became, without any formal announcement, a small and unofficial resident of the Blackwell Estate's eastern wing between the hours of 8 and 4. She was extraordinary in her silence. That was the thing that caught Ethan first. He had become acutely sensitive to sound over the past year. The migraines made everything sharp, intrusive. The cleaning staff were professionally quiet, but even they made sounds. Vacuum cleaners, supply carts, the soft conversation of people doing their jobs. Lily made almost nothing. Just the soft whisper of crayon on paper. The occasional murmured consultation with Bun. The gentle pad of small sneakers on hardwood when she moved from one spot to another. He heard her before he saw her properly. He was having a bad day, one of the bone-deep ones where the pain moved through him like weather, and he couldn't sit in any position for more than a few minutes without something aching. He had given up on the conference call at 11 and sent his assistant a brief, cold message. He had tried to read. He had tried to work. He had eventually just sat in the chair by the large window overlooking the Pacific and done nothing at all, which was the thing he had never in his adult life been willing to do and had now, under the grinding instruction of illness, slowly learned. The door to the sitting room was ajar. He heard it first, a tiny, careful voice, barely above a whisper. He looked toward the door, and through the gap, he could see a sliver of the hallway where Lily had set up her small operation. The backpack, the books, the crayons arranged in a row by some system of logic that only she understood. She was talking to Bun. He couldn't make out the words, just the cadence. Serious, instructive, like a teacher explaining something to a particularly attentive student. Something about it made the pain in his chest ease by approximately 3%. He didn't know what to do with that information. The next day, he kept the door open wider. He told himself it was for the light. By the third day, Lily had migrated slightly closer to the open door, not into his room, not even looking into his room, just closer, the way small children drift toward interesting things without being fully conscious of it. She was drawing something large and ambitious, a picture that had consumed 3 sheets of paper taped together. On the 4th day, Ethan spoke. "What are you making?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't spoken to anyone that morning except to cancel a meeting via text message, and unused voices had edges. Lily looked up. She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, her mother's eyes, serious and steady, and she held up her masterpiece. It appeared to be a house, an extremely colorful house, with a rainbow that connected the roof to a nearby cloud, and what might have been a dog or possibly a horse in the front yard, and 7 or 8 figures of varying sizes standing in front of it, each one a different color, each one with a massive circular smile. "It's everybody," Lily explained, in the tone of someone stating the obvious. "Everybody," Ethan repeated. "Everybody happy." She turned the picture back toward herself and studied it critically. "I'm gonna give it to Mama." She went back to coloring. The conversation, apparently, was complete. Ethan sat with the ocean in front of him and the sound of crayon on paper behind him and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He couldn't identify it immediately. He had to sit with it a while, the way you sit with a word you've forgotten, waiting for your brain to surface it. It was comfort. Absurd, irrational, sourceless comfort, delivered by a 3-year-old who hadn't even been trying. He mentioned none of this to anyone. Maria, meanwhile, was watching her employer with the quiet, careful attention of someone who had learned to read rooms the way others read books. She had grown up in difficult circumstances, the daughter of immigrants, raised in a small house in East Los Angeles where money was always slightly less than enough, and you learned quickly to notice things, to anticipate, to adapt. She had married young and loved fully, and lost her husband to a car accident on a rainy January evening when Lily was 8 months old. She had rebuilt herself with the specific, quiet ferocity of someone who had no other option, who had a small person depending on her hands to hold the world together. She was not a woman who missed things. She had noticed the photograph on his desk. The boy on the beach, blurred with laughter. She had noticed the way he held himself when the pain was bad, the almost imperceptible tensing around his jaw, the way his right hand would find the edge of whatever surface was nearest, not gripping, just touching.
Steadying.
She had noticed that he ate almost nothing, that the chef prepared elaborate meals that came back largely untouched, that he sat by windows a lot, that he had, in the 2 weeks she'd been there, smiled exactly once, a brief, involuntary thing, when Lily had apparently said something to Carol that made Carol laugh her rare, startled laugh, and the sound had carried down the hallway. Maria didn't ask questions. It wasn't her place, and she understood the distance between their worlds with a clarity that held no resentment, just clear-eyed realism. He was a billionaire who was suffering quietly in a house full of people who weren't allowed to see it. She was a widow raising a daughter on a cleaning salary, grateful every single day for this job, this opportunity, this specific chance to build something stable. Their lives were not supposed to intersect in any meaningful way. But Lily didn't understand any of that. Lily didn't understand distance. She didn't understand the careful social architecture of a billionaire's estate, the invisible walls between staff and employer, the language of professional remove. She was 3 years old. She understood that the man who sat by the window looked like her stuffed rabbit looked sometimes, when she left Bun on the wrong side of the room and he couldn't get to her. Lonely. She understood lonely. On the Friday at the end of the second week, while Maria was cleaning the library on the floor below, Lily did something she had never been told she could do, and had also never been told she couldn't do, because no one had anticipated it as a possibility. She walked into Ethan Blackwell's study. Not shyly. Not with hesitation. She walked in with the complete confidence of a child who has identified a problem and is taking steps to address it, climbed up onto the chair across from his desk with a slightly strenuous effort of small legs, and placed both hands flat on the desk and looked at him. He looked back. "You're sad," she said. It was not a question. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The response he was reaching for, the polished, deflecting "I'm fine, thank you," dissolved before it reached his lips because something about the way she said it, with no judgment and no fear and no agenda, just simple and accurate observation, made the usual armor useless. "I'm sick," he said finally. It was the first time he had said those words to another person without a team of lawyers and doctors in the room. Lily considered this seriously. "Bun got sick," she said. "He was very sad. I drawed him pictures." She held up the rabbit for inspection. "He's better now." Ethan looked at Bun. Bun looked back with one glass eye and magnificent stoicism. "I'm glad to hear it," Ethan said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and climbed back down from the chair with great dignity and went back to the hallway. That night, Ethan slept better than he had in 4 months. He would not have been able to explain why if you'd asked him. But something had shifted, some small and crucial thing, like a knot that has been worked at for a long time finally, against all odds, beginning to loosen. She found out on a Wednesday. Not because he told her. That was months away, a conversation that would happen after the world had already rearranged itself. She found out because she was professional and she paid attention, and she was, at the end of the day, a woman who had survived considerable loss by learning to read the reality of situations rather than their surfaces. She had overheard pieces. Not deliberately. The estate was large, but sound traveled in specific ways, and she had been in the hallway outside the medical wing when his on-staff physician spoke in the low, careful voice that doctors use when the news is not good. She had heard enough. A progressive condition. No confirmed diagnosis. Symptoms that were worsening incrementally. The word degenerative used once, quickly, quietly. She had walked away before she could hear more. She had gone to the supply closet, sat on an overturned bucket for 4 minutes with her eyes closed, and then she had gone back to work. She was not supposed to feel anything about this. She reminded herself of that on the walk home, Lily's hand in hers, the October air carrying that particular California chill that snuck up on you sideways. She was an employee. He was her employer. The gap between their lives was not just financial, it was architectural, structural, built into the very way the house functioned, the way she entered through service doors and addressed him in complete sentences and kept her eyes appropriately angled. She was not supposed to feel anything. She felt something anyway. She had grown up around suffering. She knew its texture, the way it wore on a person. She had watched her father work 3 jobs for 20 years until his body became a record of that labor. She had sat by her husband's hospital bed for 6 hours before the doctors told her he was gone, and she had held Lily in the parking garage afterward, 8 months old, uncomprehending, warm, and felt the world reorganize itself into before and after. She knew what it looked like when a person was fighting something that was bigger than they were. And she knew, with the particular knowing of someone who had been there, that the fighting itself, the relentless, armored, don't let them see it fighting, was sometimes more exhausting than the thing you were fighting. She started paying attention in a different way after that. She noticed what he ate, and she started mentioning to the chef, casually, in the spirit of professional information sharing, that she had read that certain foods reduced inflammatory response. She had done this research herself, late at night after Lily was asleep, on her phone, reading medical blogs and nutrition studies with a focused determination she applied to everything she decided mattered. The chef, who was a practical man, had incorporated some of the suggestions without comment. She noticed the plants in his study were dying, slow, neglected death, overwatered by someone who didn't know any better, and she had repotted them and positioned them differently, closer to the light, not because she had been asked but because dead things in a sick person's space felt important to address. She noticed that the study had become where Lily spent most of her time now, in the hallway just outside the open door, and that the open door was his invitation, and she didn't interfere with it, though some instinct warned her that this was territory she should monitor carefully. She noticed that he was, for all his money and his control and his extraordinary competence, deeply and completely alone in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people in his house. She knew that particular aloneness. She'd lived inside it. Lily was asking to bring him a drawing one afternoon. She had made a picture specifically, she announced, for the sad man, and Maria had sat with that for a moment, holding both the drawing and the complicated feeling of a child's uncomplicated compassion. "You can leave it by the door," Maria said carefully. "On the little table." "I want to give it to him," Lily said, with the unshakable logic of someone who has not yet learned that wanting things doesn't always determine outcomes. Maria looked at the drawing. It was a sunny day, big yellow sun, 2 figures of wildly different heights standing next to each other, both smiling enormously. One had long hair. One was taller and had what appeared to be a cape. "Who is this?" she asked, pointing to the caped figure. "Him," Lily said simply. "I made him a cape because he needs one." Maria looked at her daughter for a long moment, this small, serious person she had made, somehow, in the wreckage of the worst year of her life, and felt the specific love that doesn't have an edge, the kind that goes so deep you can't find the bottom. "Okay," she said. "You can give it to him." What happened next was not unusual, not on its face. Lily walked in, held out the drawing, said, "I made you a cape," and walked back out. It took 45 seconds. Ethan had taken the drawing with an expression that Maria, watching from the doorway, would have called demolished. Not in a bad way, but the way a wall is demolished when something more important needs to be in the space it was taking up. He had said thank you. He had looked at the drawing for a long time. Maria had returned to her work and not allowed herself to think too much about the way his voice had caught on those 2 words, or the way his hands had held the child's drawing with more care than she'd seen him apply to anything else in that house. She had not allowed herself to think about him the way a person thinks about another person. She was mostly successful. The part she couldn't control was the dreaming. 3 weeks in, she had a dream that was not romantic exactly. It was too rooted in something more elemental than that. She dreamed they were both in the ocean, just past the breaking waves, and the water was cold and enormous, and they were both treading water with a serious effort of people who are tired but not yet ready to stop. She woke up with her heart pounding and Lily curled against her side like a warm parenthesis, and she lay in the dark of their small apartment and told herself very firmly that she was not going to be a woman who made something out of nothing. She had enough going on. She had a daughter to raise and a job to keep and a life that she had built carefully, brick by careful brick, out of the rubble of loss. She could not afford to be foolish. She had never, even in the worst of it, been foolish. She went back to work on Thursday and did not look at him differently. She almost believed herself. It happened on a Thursday morning in November, when the marine layer had rolled in thick off the Pacific and the whole estate sat wrapped in a white, muffled quiet that made the world feel smaller and softer than usual. Ethan had a bad night, the kind where pain moved through him like a tide, receding only enough to let him drift towards sleep before surging back. He'd been awake since 3. By 7 he was in the study, sitting at his desk in clothes he'd pulled on without paying attention, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and a document open on his laptop that he was reading without comprehension. He looked, by any measure, like a man who had been through something. Maria came in at 8. She saw it immediately. The jaw, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of stillness that wasn't peace but endurance. And she went about her work with the extra care she'd learned to take on these mornings, moving quietly, not speaking unless spoken to, making the room less instead of more. Lily had settled in her spot in the hallway. She had her crayons. She had Bun. She had a fresh stack of paper from her backpack. She began to draw with her customary seriousness. Maria was finishing the windows when she heard Lily's voice, low and confiding, speaking to Bun.
"He needs a note," Lily was saying.
Maria turned. Lily was already in motion. She had torn a small square of paper from her drawing stack, a sunny yellow piece, the color of concentrated daylight, and she was writing on it. Lily knew only some of her letters yet. She was 3. But she had been asking Maria to write things for her for months, and she had been watching carefully, and she had strong opinions about which letters went where and what they were supposed to say. She wrote for a long moment, tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. Then she got up, walked to the study door, knocked twice with her small fist, which made almost no sound at all. "Come in," Ethan said, in the automatic way of someone who has forgotten that the world contains things other than what they're staring at. Lily walked to his desk, placed the yellow square in front of him, walked back out. That was all. Maria was frozen at the window. Ethan looked down at the note. It was small. It was yellow. It was, by any technical standard, a child's messy, effortful, imperfect printing. Some letters were backward. One word had been started and crossed out with a single careful line. The whole thing took up the space of a post-it note, which is in fact what it was. Lily had found one in her mother's tote bag and considered it perfect. It said, "You are brave. Feel better."
Lily.
That was it. 5 words. 3 letters of a name. A backward E. Ethan Blackwell sat at his desk in the silent, fog-wrapped morning and read those 5 words and felt something crack open inside him. Not painfully, not with the sound of breaking, but the way ice cracks in spring, suddenly, quietly, as if it had been waiting all season for exactly this temperature. He put his hand over his mouth. He sat that way for a very long time. Maria had not moved from the window. She was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to disturb whatever was happening because she recognized it. She had her own memory of the moment when she finally stopped pretending she was fine, and it had not been a grand dramatic occasion. It had been Lily, 7 months old, grabbing her finger in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and the simple warmth of that small grip had broken through every wall she'd built, and she had sat on the kitchen floor and cried for 20 minutes for the first time since the funeral. Grief needed small things. Need needed small things. The enormous emotions didn't open for enormous gestures. They opened for baby fingers and sticky notes and the specific, uncalculating love of children who hadn't yet learned that love was something you were supposed to measure out carefully. Mrs. Santos. His voice was different. Not broken, but opened. Yes, she said, and her voice came out more careful than she intended. He turned in his chair to look at her. In the white morning light, without the usual composed CEO expression, without the performance of normalcy, he looked 33 years old in a way he hadn't seemed before. He looked like the boy in the beach photograph. He looked tired and real, and something she didn't have a clean word for. How does she know? He asked. Maria didn't pretend not to understand. She pays attention, she said. She always has. Since she was very small. She notices when people are hurting. He looked down at the note again. She spelled brave correctly. That's her favorite word, Maria said, before she could stop herself. She makes me say it every night. When I tuck her in, she makes me say. She stopped. He waited. Maria let out a breath. She makes me say, you are brave and you are loved and tomorrow is going to be okay. The silence was very full. Does it help? He asked. And she understood, without any possibility of misunderstanding, that he was not asking about Lily. Every single time, she said. He nodded slowly. He folded the sticky note. Small, careful, with the deliberate attention of someone handling something fragile. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to whatever was underneath. Thank you, he said. She didn't tell him he was welcome because the thanks wasn't really for her, and they both knew it. She finished the windows. She left the room. She walked down the hallway to where Lily was already drawing the next thing, fully absorbed, mission accomplished, and filed away. Maria crouched down to her daughter's level. That was very kind, she said softly. What you just did. Lily looked up. Her expression was simple, uncomplicated, the face of someone who has done the obvious thing and can't understand why it requires comment.
He needed it, she said.
She went back to drawing. The changes were not dramatic. That was the thing about real change. It rarely was. Ethan started eating his meals. Not all of them, not immediately, but more than before. The chef noticed and said nothing, in the practiced way of staff who have learned that noticing things aloud can spoil them. He started keeping his study door open more consistently. Not all the way, just enough. Just the width of an invitation. He started talking to Lily. These conversations were not long, and they were not what most people would call significant. They were conversations about Bun's ongoing recovery, slow but promising, about the color system of Lily's crayon collection, complex and non-negotiable, about whether clouds were actually soft or just looked soft. Lily was convinced they were soft, and Ethan found he didn't want to be the one to correct her, about the drawings she was working on and who they were for and what she was trying to say with them. She was always trying to say something. That was what he learned about Lily Santos. She drew the way other people wrote, purposefully, with intention, each picture a communication directed at a specific recipient for a specific reason. She drew him more pictures. A dog. You should have one. Dogs make people better. A drawing of the sun specifically, labeled sun in large letters. You sit by the window, but you don't go outside. The sun can't reach you inside. A drawing of two people eating at a table. You should eat more. Mama says you don't eat. That last one made him look up sharply from his desk. Maria, in the process of dusting the bookshelf, found the ceiling suddenly interesting. Does your mama talk about me? He asked Lily. She says you're smart, Lily said, without looking up from her current project.
And sad.
But mostly smart. Lily, Maria started. And she says you're the best place she's ever worked, Lily added helpfully. She told Grandma on the phone. The ceiling was very interesting. Maria was very focused on a particular section of it. You know, Ethan said, and his voice had something new in it, something lighter, something that lived in the same neighborhood as warmth. Your daughter is extremely honest. She has no idea that's unusual, Maria said, still not looking at him. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. His laugh had been out of use long enough to require calibration, but almost. The almost laugh made something happen to Maria Santos's heartbeat that she firmly decided not to examine. It was 2 weeks after the sticky note that he went outside for the first time in months. It was Lily who did it, because of course it was. She had produced a drawing of the beach, their beach, the one visible from his windows, and presented it to him with the announcement that it looked different in person and he should check. He had looked at the drawing.
At the beach.
At the drawing again. Would you like to come? He asked, and he was asking both of them, and it came out slightly uncertain in a way that made Maria feel the impossible tenderness of watching something brave and unguarded. They walked on the beach for 40 minutes on a cold November afternoon. A billionaire in an expensive coat that the wind disagreed with, a cleaning woman with her hair coming loose from its clip, and a toddler who ran at the waves and screamed with joy each time they chased her back up the sand. Lily collected 17 rocks. She gave Ethan 5 of them. He put them in his coat pocket with the same careful gravity with which he'd folded the sticky note. Something was happening in his body, too, that he couldn't fully explain to his doctors. He reported it at his next examination with the bewilderment of a man who has been given a gift he didn't know he was eligible for. The pain was the same, but he was bearing it differently. Not because it had lessened, but because something else had expanded, some reservoir of capacity he hadn't known he was depleting. His blood work showed the first marginal improvement in 8 months. His neurologist, a careful woman who did not believe in miracles, nonetheless used the word unexplained 3 times in a row and looked at him differently. What changed? She asked. Ethan thought about a yellow sticky note in his jacket pocket, about 17 beach rocks, about a one-eyed rabbit and a child who drew people capes because they needed them. I stopped being alone, he said. The improvement was real, and it was ongoing. The doctors began to develop a theory: stress-mediated immune dysregulation, profound social isolation as an accelerating factor, the nervous system's complex and underappreciated relationship with connection and safety. It was not a cure. The underlying condition still did not have a clean name, but his body had found, in some ancient and unmapped way, a reason to keep fighting instead of just surrendering. And he knew, in the part of himself that had been educated not by Forbes or his father, but by a 3-year-old with a box of crayons, exactly what the reason was. He started talking to Maria properly. Not employer to employee, person to person. It began in small ways. He asked about Lily's sleeping habits, apparently legendary and enviable, about Maria's background, about the small apartment they lived in that was warm and full of drawings taped to every available surface. She answered carefully at first, watching for the edge of appropriate, and then less carefully, and then not carefully at all, because something about him had changed. The walls were different now, lower, or maybe just more honestly placed, showing the actual perimeter of a person rather than a performance of one. She told him about her husband. She had not planned to. It came out on an afternoon when Lily had fallen asleep in the reading chair by the window, curled impossibly small, bun tucked under one arm, and they had both gone quiet in the way of people who don't want to wake something peaceful. She told him about Daniel, about who he had been, the specific way he laughed, the way he'd always put extra blankets on her side of the bed before she got in, about the rain on that January Tuesday. About the parking garage. Ethan listened in the particular way of someone who understands, personally and in their cells, what it costs to say things out loud for the first time. He told her about the beach photograph. About his brother Marcus, who had died when Ethan was 12, suddenly, and without any preparation. About how his parents had handled grief by building more empire, and how he had learned to do the same, and how well that worked until the body refused to cooperate. They talked until Lily woke up, refreshed and declarative, and announced she was hungry and also that Bun had dreamed about fish. Maria looked at him, and he looked at her, and something was acknowledged without a single word being said.
It was terrifying.
It was also, unmistakably, the direction of something worth being afraid of. Spring came to Malibu the way it always did. Not dramatically, but insistently. The light changing its angle and the air losing its edge, and the flowers along the estate's western wall blooming with the cheerful indifference of things that do not know they're being watched. Lily turned 4 in March. She had a party, small, specific, exactly what she requested. Maria had planned it for weeks, squeezing the budget in the careful way she had always operated, making the most of what was available. When Ethan found out about it, 3 days before, he said nothing. He did not offer money. He understood instinctively that this was not something Maria wanted him to provide, that this party, exactly as she had planned it, was an expression of love and capability, and that resources would not improve it. What he offered instead was the garden. The estate's back garden, which had been largely ceremonial and underused, was available, he mentioned, and it had good light in the afternoon. If Lily would like to have her party there, he'd make sure the staff knew not to disturb. Maria had looked at him for a long moment. "She'll want to invite you," she said. "You should know that going in." "I'm aware," he said. "She already told me." "She already?" "Yesterday. She came in and said, 'You're invited, but you have to wear a funny hat.' I told her I would do my best." Maria put her hand over her mouth in the gesture she'd developed for moments when something cracked through the professional composure she worked to maintain. He had, in fact, worn the hat. A small purple paper crown that Lily had made specifically, decorated with what she called diamonds, small pieces of aluminum foil that she'd cut and pressed onto the cardboard. He had worn it for 2 hours. He had eaten cake. He had participated in a game whose rules were explained by Lily in real time and appeared to shift whenever she required them to. He had laughed, really laughed, not almost, but the actual thing, from somewhere low and unguarded, when Lily had solemnly presented Bun with his own slice of cake and then eaten it herself on the grounds that Bun said I could. The medical team's latest report arrived the following week. Continued measurable improvement. The neurological misfiring was decreasing in frequency. The immune markers were trending toward normalization. The lead doctor used a phrase she had never used in his case before: trajectory toward remission. Ethan sat with the report in his study. The study that now had Lily's drawings taped to the wall behind his desk, 7 of them in a row, an eclectic and colorful account of the last several months, and he thought about what had changed and what it meant. He thought about the sticky note. He had never stopped carrying it. It had moved through 4 jacket pockets, had survived a dry cleaning scare where he'd rescued it at the last moment from a coat going to the cleaners, had been laminated on a quiet Wednesday afternoon by his assistant, who had asked no questions because he paid her to ask no questions. It lived now in his wallet. He touched it sometimes without realizing he was doing it. "You are brave. Feel better." Lily. He had been brave. He had let people in. That was what it required, the specific bravery of allowing yourself to be seen as you were, sick and scared and sitting by windows in the hope of something, in the hope of any warmth at all. He had let a 3-year-old see it first, because children are the only truth-tellers we allow near us without suspicion. And then, because Lily had opened the door, He had let her mother see it too. He told Maria he loved her on an ordinary Tuesday evening in April. It wasn't planned. It was the least planned thing he'd done since he'd learned to plan everything at the age of 12. They were in the garden after Lily had gone to sleep in the small room that had, gradually and without formal announcement, become hers, filled with a proper cot and her drawings and a small bookshelf that had appeared one morning because the books kept falling off her backpack. The sun was going down, and the Pacific was doing the thing it did at that hour, turning the light into something that didn't seem real. He said it simply, plainly, with the directness he had always used for the only things he actually meant. Maria turned and looked at him. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for a while." Are you?"
"Yes," she said.
"Obviously yes." He exhaled. She laughed. It was the realest laugh he'd ever heard from her, full-bodied and unguarded, the laugh of a woman who has put down something heavy and found her hands lighter than she remembered. He thought he could spend a considerable number of years learning all the variations of that laugh. He thought he would like to try. There were things to navigate, the professional reality, the social distance, the commentary of the world, which had opinions about billionaires and the women they loved. There were conversations to have, and logistics to work through, and the careful, patient construction of something real. Maria would not be rushed, and he understood this completely, understood that she had built her life with her own hands, and that she was bringing something into this that was worth the same respect as anything he'd built. This was not a rescue. This was a meeting of two people who had been broken in different ways and had found, against reasonable odds, that the breaks aligned. And there was Lily. Lily, who had known before anyone. Lily, who had drawn him a cape before he'd earned one. Lily, who had walked into his study on a foggy November morning with a yellow sticky note and 5 words that contained more medicine than anything his 31 specialists had prescribed. On a Saturday in May, Lily informed both of them at breakfast that she had decided they were a family. She said this with the administrative confidence of someone issuing a memo. She was eating cereal. Bun was propped against the orange juice. "Okay," she said, "that's settled." Ethan and Maria looked at each other across the table. "Is it?" Ethan said. Lily said, already moving on to the next matter, which was apparently Bun's opinion on what they should do after breakfast. Maria looked at her daughter. This enormous, ridiculous, boundless love of her life, this small person who had somehow, in her first 4 years, fixed a man that $14 billion couldn't fix. She looked at Ethan, who was watching Lily with an expression she had come to recognize as the one that meant, "I can't believe this is my life, but I will defend it with everything I have." "Yeah," Maria said softly. "I think it is." The sticky note was laminated in Ethan's wallet. The 17 beach rocks were on his desk. The drawings were on his wall. His body was healing in ways that science was still working to explain, tracking the data, writing the papers, searching for the mechanism. The mechanism was sitting across the breakfast table explaining to a stuffed rabbit that they were going to the beach today, and he needed to be ready. The mechanism was a sunny yellow square of paper and 5 words from a 4-year-old who had understood, from the very beginning, what every doctor had missed: that the body does not heal in isolation, that wellness is not a solo project, that we are, all of us, waiting to be seen by someone who looks without judgment and speaks without agenda and places in front of us, without ceremony, the simple and radical truth. You are brave. Feel better. That's all it takes sometimes. That and someone who means it. And they did, all 3 of them. They felt better. Every single day.